Okay. Thanks everybody for joining this afternoon. Appreciate it. Can I get an approval of the agenda that Ms. Arthur so kindly put out for us?
I move to approve.
Okay, Maureen approves, Matthew second, all in favor? All right, approval, wonderful. The minutes from our January 25th meeting, any comments or questions, omissions, additions on that? Again, thank you, Ms. Arthurs, for putting that out for us. No? Okay, can I have an approval of the Millbrook Valley Trails Committee meeting minutes for January 25th, 2021? Craig, I saw you shoot your hand up. Second? Matthew, thank you for seconding. All in favor? Do we have enough for quorum actually on?
We've got 5, as long as John's there. I don't see him and he's muted, but as long as he's there, and there we go.
Okay, great. And Alex should be joining momentarily. I think he's just had trouble on the roads today.
Okay.
Okay. Get back here. Financial report, Ms. Arthurs.
So really nothing to report as far as expenditures. The budget for the Millbrook Valley Trails for $6,300 was approved in our 2021 operating budget. So you'll have those funds to spend. The one thing that we did talk about a couple of times was that $300 line item on memberships. And I don't know whether or not you know or not, Rob, the other day an email came through from the Ontario Trails, and there was a list of people or a list of municipalities that had purchased their membership. Now, we weren't on that, so I don't know if that is where that $300 was allocated in previous years. If it's something you want us to look into, I definitely can if you think there's any value in that membership, or if you know offhand if that's where it went. I can't find anything else where that money might have been set aside for in previous budgets. Now, I haven't gone back to, 4 or 5 years back, and I could check that as well, but.
Yeah, no. I think that's my recollection. Does anybody on the committee have any other recollections on that? No. Okay.
I'll look into it.
Is it a big deal to look into it?
It's not a big deal. That we didn't do it last year, so I continued to get emails, but I think it just eliminates any voting rights. So I don't know whether or not anybody ever actually took advantage of a membership, if it's worth purchasing, if we're still getting kind of the updates and that kind of thing. Right. Sometimes those memberships, we have them and we just continue paying for them, and there's really not any value if we're not using them in the capacity they're there for. But I'm happy to go back and check, and I'll take a look and see what that membership provides, and then it can come back to the next meeting. Okay.
Given your, just I'm thinking of timing, is there any assistance we can give on that? Anything I can do from my end?
I don't think so. We have Cindy with us tonight. So Cindy will maintain or continue to come to the meetings and do the minutes. I think at the next meeting, Yvette is going to attend, and then going from there, you can talk to her as a committee and determine if there's a need for Yvette to attend, if it's something that Cindy and Matthew can collect information and go back. But Yvette will make herself available for the next meeting for sure, just to get up to speed. And in the meantime, Cindy will continue to attend and take minutes. So you'll have a staff person here to go back with any information that you need.
Okay, excellent.
I can pull a history on that, Robert, on that GL line and see what historical memberships we bought, and I can just bring them to the next meeting.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, Meredith has not joined as far as I can see. Is that correct?
I don't see her either, and usually she's good if she's not coming, so I don't know.
Yes, so I assume you haven't got any update from Margaret.
No, I'll send her a quick email and see if she responds here.
Okay, that's fine. And sorry, I think there's maybe my confusion. So I think on the, no, okay. So I was looking at the January 25th trail report. So sorry, that was Craig. And so the trail report for this month was myself and John Pauls. Is that correct?
Yes,
That's right.
And you didn't respond, you didn't get anything from John?
I didn't. And usually he's pretty good, so
Yeah, okay.
maybe he didn't have a chance to get out.
Okay, so I did everything south of the Fourth Line, and you know it's pretty standard, right? It's heavy snow cover this month. We got a lot of snow in the last week or so, and even more today. We still have the issue on lower meds of the boardwalk just directly before the new boardwalk we put down last fall, sort of the curved boardwalk as we call it, and it's still leaning, but you know, frozen and unable to be fixed, the same as last month. The trails are still heavily used, as is the trail that's been closed. There's a lot of footprints and things down there, but there's not a lot we can do about that, unfortunately. So I don't have any real issues. Station Trail is fine. No real issues that I could see. Again, good usage, judging from the packed snow and the number of footprints. People seem to be staying on the trail, and they're quite clean in terms of dog waste and any other waste. But I don't know if anybody else has any other input on that, just from their travels.
Yeah, I've been on Station Trail. It's in really good shape. Less icy this year on the ramp, that on the sort of hairpin curve there that you go down to get on the trail, just because the snowpack has covered the ice. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. If this thawing weather, if we get a refreeze, it could get really icy there again. The rail bed from the Fourth Line south is in really good shape. Cedar and Meadow are in good shape, all the way to Elgar. The Itch is in good shape. And I haven't been on any of the other trails. The area around the trout pond, I'll be curious to see how mucky it gets in this weather, but it's held up really well through the winter thus far.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's great. And just while we're on the topic of ice, I will mention that the French drain that the township put in with some of our funds, but their people power on Meds Mountain has certainly seemed to work. There's been no icy patches at all, and so that is that's very, very nice to see. I think there's still a bit of seeding that might need to be done in the spring because it was done quite late in the fall, and they did obviously have to dig into the earth. So we'll see if we need to do some seeding or if Mother Nature just handles that for us. But I think that's very good. And then maybe I'll ask the committee members and members of the township and council if they've heard any more information from the MNR on the lock breaking issue at the ponds. Any update to that?
I have not heard anything.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, yeah, so obviously this time of year, I think looking in the long-term forecast, it looks like winter is certainly mostly behind us, and there certainly seems to be some warm weather coming. So I always ask members around this time of year, as you're walking the trails, try to look for items that we could start to deal with for a possible workday or just general maintenance once weather permits. Obviously, it's probably going to be another couple months till we're able to get out there. This month as well, leading into the end of March for our next meeting, it may well be that the trails are fully thawed. And with that comes potential for the spring runoff and the spring thaw, and the possibility of needing to close some trails as we did last year to maintain their overall integrity. So again, I would just ask committee members as they're walking to keep those things in mind and maybe make a list. I sort of have a running list on my phone, but if you can jot it down somewhere and either email the committee, myself, or bring it to the next meeting, then we will see about possible maintenance that we can complete. Whether or not we'll be able to have a work day as we usually do is probably, I'm guessing, not going to be possible in our April-May timeframe just due to the pandemic, but we may be able to hold smaller gatherings as we did last fall. I guess we'll just have to play that by ear in terms of what's allowed, what's going on with the world, obviously, how people feel, and obviously what the township thinks in terms of people being able to gather to do that. So yeah, that's all I want to say on that. But if you could just keep sort of a running list, that would be wonderful. Any other comments on status of the trails? Okay, well then maybe we'll move back a section if that's okay, and welcome Meredith from Orca.
Thank you. Sorry I was late joining.
No problem.
I hope everyone's well. I don't really think I have a whole lot to report. Did anybody have any specific questions for me? I can certainly try to answer those.
Just maybe from my end, I'm still planning to contact Orca to initiate the potential bridge building process in the spring on the reroute of Meadow Trail. But again, that's going to be sort of contingent on, what sort of construction we're allowed to do just around the COVID issue.
Yeah, perfect. So Don Allen, he's been the regulations officer who's helped through most of those. So he certainly is a great resource, and he can help facilitate that. All of our planning and regs permit applications, they are online, but if you need any help describing what you want to do, or with any of the mechanics of that, certainly don't hesitate to get in touch.
Okay. Wonderful. There was one other issue I wanted to bring to your attention. I meant to email you earlier this week, but it kind of got away from me. Are you aware of, I'm sure you are, the Kawartha Conservation launching the Talking Forest at the Ken Reed Conservation Authority?
I'm familiar with many of their events. I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay. So maybe I'll email this to you, but
Okay.
It was kind of interesting just around some of the signage we might want to do. But on February 9th, Ken Reed Conservation Area had a new Talking Forest application available for smartphones. So the innovative application helps bring trees to life, sharing their stories in their own words, allowing visitors to explore, learn, and engage at their own pace, all while social distancing in the great outdoors. And I know we had talked about our signage initiative just around obviously new trailhead signs, but my desire to maybe have additional signage along the trails in terms of flora, fauna, wildlife. And this certainly seemed like an interesting way to be able to do that. It's basically a sign with a QR code that you can scan and be able to have that sort of spoken to you. So I was just wondering if you had any knowledge of it, and maybe sort of be able to talk about the technical background, sort of what is required. But
no, I can certainly get some information if you'd like it, but it sounds like it's really kind of a virtual self-guided walking tour, as you said, where you scan a code as you move along and are provided with information.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll send it to you now. And if there's maybe if you read it and think it's interesting, maybe you might know somebody there that you could put me in touch with that would be able to sort of help me understand it more in terms of what's involved from a technical point of view.
Sure, I can certainly connect you. I think I know who the staff person is, but I'll just confirm that.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, perfect. I actually realized there is one thing that I did want to mention that I forgot all about. Tree sales. So 'tis the season for ordering tree seedlings. So our tree program is open until the middle of March. We are getting a huge volume of orders this year, and we're starting to run out. So if you did want to order anything, now is the time.
Okay,
And that can be either through the committee, like for the trails, or if anyone is personally interested as well. The online applications are accessible through our website. I can also flip out a link if everyone would like that.
and what's the deadline for that, Meredith?
March 15th, March 19th. That
Okay.
last, that middle week in March. I'm just looking at my calendar.
Okay, so we usually purchase seedlings. What does the committee think?
Did we get enough planting in where the machinery between Station Trail and the public yard kind of made the ground quite swampy? Did we end up putting, I think that was after our tree planting.
We did put the row of cedars in. Is that what you're thinking of along the works yard?
Yeah, we did that, but then we had the culvert repairs, and to get up or to get to the culvert, there was quite a lot of machinery kind of churning up of earth and stuff. And I think it was in an area where we hadn't done any tree planting before.
No, we hadn't done any there before. You think we need to there?
I think we likely will. I mean, there might be, kind of ephemerals and other perennials come up in that area, but just in general along there, it would be nice to have a green screen.
Okay.
Just because of all the buildings.
So cedars?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Alana, do you by chance have what we spent last year?
I feel like we were in and around $100 and then there was tax. Does that sound right, Meredith?
That's about right. And I can't access that right now.
I feel like
It
we
was
did
less than 200.
I feel like we maybe
can
did
just-
an upset limit of 150.
I think that
so.
something like that. Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
were very close, or we were slightly over with tax. So we might just want to make sure that we have enough room. It's not a big deal if we spend less. It's better that we go a little higher than lower.
Right.
I'm thinking there, and if we do have any luck getting some of that, the old kitchen appliances that are by the new diversion of Baxter Creek Trail,
Yeah.
that area will have to be repopulated with foliage, so we could put some cedar in there as well.
Okay.
You know where I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. At the end of Ann Street there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nothing that we buy for $100 will be wasted. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, do we want to have then an upset limit set for purchase? And I'll go through the order from last year, Meredith. Maybe you can help me with that. And
Yeah,
just sort of
Robert, sorry, I don't mean to jump in. One thing I add, and maybe Meredith is familiar, I know in talking to folks from the Trout Unlimited Millbrook chapter, they are planning some tree plantings. And I'm not sure, Meredith, if they've been in contact with you or if Alana or Matt know if they've been in touch with the township, but I know that they have been planning some tree plantings. Are you aware of that, Meredith?
No, I'm not. I haven't been contacted by anyone.
Okay, because if you'd like, I could reach out and confirm what their plans are, because perhaps there's some collaborative opportunity there to share resources.
It may be best for them to contact the township because it's likely
Okay.
on municipal property.
Yes, okay. Yeah, and I know Corey's well-versed in requirements and permitting. She's on that chapter, Corey Carveth. So I'll reach out to her.
Okay.
I'll
Maybe
let
you
her know.
find out and let me know, Craig.
I will.
And we can possibly collaborate, but
Yeah.
as we said, maybe if we set an upset limit, as Alana says, it's okay to go below that. So if they're already planning, we don't need to spend as much, so we can determine that, but we need to know by March 15th, obviously. So if I can leave you that in your hands to be able to reach out and find out what the deal is with that, then we can go from there. But do we
In the
wanna-
meantime, Robert, I can pull a copy of the order when I have access to the server, and I can send that to you tomorrow.
Yeah, that's great. Okay.
Okay.
And so does somebody want to make a motion to set an upset limit to be able to possibly purchase some trees?
I'll make the motion that we set an upset limit of $150, or is 100 going to be enough plus tax?
You know, I'd probably go 250 just because
Okay.
the tree prices are a little higher this year.
Okay,
Yeah, and the packing fees were higher this year, so just so you're covered in case you want to order more species, that would just be my recommendation.
okay, 250.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a second? Craig? Okay, wonderful. All in favor? Motion carried. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Meredith. I just had another question. Do you have an update on when the signage for the mill is going to be installed?
I do not. That is being dealt with through our communications person, but I can certainly find out and then I can send you an update.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming they're just waiting for the better weather. My understanding in talking with Dan in the late fall when they installed the post was that it was almost ready. But obviously you don't want to do it with 2 feet of snow. Yeah, like if you can get that update, that's fine, but it can certainly wait till our next meeting.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for Meredith? Okay, wonderful. So let's move on to general business. And Maureen, do you want to talk briefly about the leadership roundtable terms of reference?
Sure. Meredith and I both serve on the leadership roundtable of the Pathway to Stewardship and Kinship Collaborative. So I wanted you to be aware that even though I'm a volunteer on the committee, part of my cachet as part of the roundtable is that I am a member of the Millbrook Valley Trails Committee. I was brought on actually to the roundtable because they couldn't find a pediatrician to be part of the Pathway to Stewardship and Kinship Collaborative. They were just too busy. And so it was really as a position that I was initially brought on, and then it just happened to be very handy that I was one of the local and regional trails on one of them as a volunteer. However, I'm not really a representative per se of the Millbrook Valley Trails unless you give me the ability to represent the trail. So the terms of reference give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish as the collaborative. I've been serving on the leadership roundtable for 2.5 years, I figure now. And it's becoming more and more successful in terms of its outreach into the schools and into the community, with many sponsoring and endorsing local agencies and organizations, with Camp Forth as the backbone. And with Ontario Trillium Foundation funding.
Okay.
Giving you a minute to scan through because you may not have had time before. So whereas I would imagine someone like yourself, Meredith, as an employee at Orca would have had to have the organization's signature. I've never actually asked for yours as a committee chair or the township's signature. And I'm not entirely sure I'm asking for it now. I just want the township to be aware that this is a program that it would be a feather in their cap to be a part of.
I think with something like this, Maureen, if you wanted it to and be reflective of your affiliation with the Millbrook Valley Trails, it would be something that we'd want to take back to council. My only concern is that if you're representing the trails, essentially you're representing the township, and if the township council isn't really aware of the program, they might like to see kind of the minutes of the meetings and that sort of thing, just to make sure that there's just some understanding from council's perspective, being that the Millbrook Valley Trails is a committee of council. So if it's something that you wanted to present to council, I think you can totally do that. If it's something that doesn't, make a lot of difference to you one way or the other, I would say definitely, continue to bring back information to the Trails Committee. And if there's something specific that the Trails Committee wants to be involved in, you could always take it as a one-off to council. If you wanted to go through with the terms of reference the way it is now and not worry about bringing it all back to council, I would just suggest you do it as Maureen. And if you wanted the trails endorsement, then I think it should go back to council just so that they're aware.
Okay, I'll let the leadership roundtable know that's the way it should likely be handled. Kathy Duick, who is the chair and has been the seed person right from the very beginning, did suggest that at any time she could make a presentation to council, but it wasn't specifically for this purpose, to get your signature on the leadership roundtable terms of reference. It was more just to make you aware of what the program was. So that might be a good idea anyway. So if you ever have a slow meeting and are looking for something to fill it with, that might be a good time to pull Kathy in. She does have kind of a package talk, and it's really good to see lots of happy kids out in the woods.
Absolutely. And at any time, if she's interested in coming as a delegation, she can contact myself for the next couple of weeks, or Cindy, and get on an agenda. It's, sometimes these virtual meetings make it a little bit easier to facilitate it. You don't have to worry about weather and, that kind of thing. So by all means, if she's interested, we can always set that up.
I'll let her know. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a comment on that, Rob, through you, is the only thing that sort of I saw as potentially conflicting with that, Maureen, was that, with in some of the language above the agreement portion, they sure seem very vocal about the confidentiality of the content of some of those meetings. And so that might be diametrically opposed with being able to be transparent with council. I don't really understand why they would go to that extent of language with regards to the privacy, etc., of the content, based on, like, I looked on the website, I read a little bit, and it all sounds very nice. So I'm not exactly sure the content that would require that sort of language. So I was a bit surprised when I read it in the forum. Maybe it's just some lawyer made the suggestion, but
yeah,
though
I think
that seems a bit inconsistent with, there's no harm in making your affiliation to the MVT known, but it's the embodiment and carrying with it the township, to me, is a bit of a, it might be more complication than it's worth in that regard, unless, I didn't quite understand or see here if it's going to be that helpful or not. I'm not sure, because like it said, it sounds like you're there doing it already, and it sounds like everything's a great program. So it might just, be, if there's a value to proceed with your affiliation with it formally, then, like I said, come to council, we can do it that way, no problem. It seems like there might be some conflict potentially there with some of that language. So we can cross that bridge when we get there, but over to you.
Yeah, I think the language has more to do with that kind of language is now used with any organization that deals with children, their caregivers, and you know, the school boards all have language of that type. So it's fairly common to see that. But I take your point. Thanks.
Great. Any other questions around that? No? Okay. So let's move on to 8.2, trail master plan update. So as Matthew mentioned in our last meeting in January, there were some discussions around updating our Cabot Monaghan Trail Master Plan. I think the last time it was looked at was 10 years ago, and it was originally authored in 2001, if I'm correct. So earlier last week, myself, Alana, Matthew, and Alex got together as a subcommittee to go over that. And Matthew, do you want to sort of take us through what we talked about and the proposed changes in this document?
Yeah, I think I'll let Alana's sort of taken the conversation and infuse that into this document. So I will let her, I think it's most of it is color coded to sort of bring it to everyone's attention. There's still some layering to the document and the context in which it operates in that I think needs to be ironed out a little bit. The document in of itself is a township document to be a guiding, forum for, the township to carry forward its interest in trail enhancement and development. And Millbrook Valley Trail, as it stands right now, is the volunteer embodiment of this document. But this document doesn't begin and end with Millbrook Valley Trail. So it's kind of, there have been not incoherent, but maybe incompatible and inconsistencies within some of the language and specifically with some of the projects outlined that aren't really how it's been operating or how it's been existing over the last 10 years, and certainly not how it's operating now. So what we did was look at, as a subcommittee, look at some of the language that, might be inconsistent and maybe out of date with, where things are at and where things are going. But try to keep the heart of the document as consistent as it is. But I still think that there's a potential improvement in and above the changes that we made to sort of clarify Millbrook Valley Trail's role in carrying forward their portion of the document of itself. Because as everyone or most people and the members of the committee are aware, there have been references by other groups suggesting that maybe the mandates outlined by the township elements of the document haven't been fulfilled by Millbrook Valley Trails. But there's a fiefdom within the document that's really your purview, not the entirety of the document. So that's something that I'm still have some ideas that and I've shared with Alana, and we're going to have a conversation with Yvette tomorrow about. And we'll work with that. But that said, there's still some adjustments here, and I'll let Alana sort of steer us through some of the conversation about some of the changes. And by all means, if any member of the committee has more to say, we're happy to hear it. But again, I just wanted to keep in mind that, we're not trying to change the document of itself to fit the purposes of Millbrook Valley Trails. There were just some inconsistencies and out-of-date nuances to the document that we thought could be benefited with a brief update. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alana.
Okay, through you, Robert. There were a few minor changes that we made throughout it that I did not highlight. So just so you're aware, we were really conscious of adding the word passive. It was located in some of them, like a passive recreation opportunity. There was one area that spoke to motorized vehicles, which we removed. Again, I didn't highlight some of that. So most of what was added was highlighted. And as we go through it, I can identify anything that was really kind of out of whack. And I know if you just go back up just a little bit, Cindy, in the page prior, not that far, come back down. There you go. Where it has developed linkages to existing regional trails, those 3 bullets there at the bottom of that page, they had specific numbers in them. So it said develop linkages to 5 existing regional trails. So we just took out the numbers out of there just so it was a little less specific as, you know, we continue to build trails. There was a paragraph in there about preliminary research that had been done in 2001. You know, that's 20 years outdated. So we took that reference out. So if you go back, Cindy, to that next page where you were on the accessible, we added some wording. There was nothing in there about, you know, the consideration of exploring the accessible opportunities and options. So, you know, it spoke to having the varied levels of physical ability, but nothing that said, you know, we're going to take the accessible element and review it as we develop new trails. And surely in the last 10 years, the accessibility guidelines and the expectations are that we make more accessible trails and that sort of thing. So we wanted to add some wording for that. The integrated, again, that was just adding in that passive, making sure that we weren't talking about anything other than those passive recreation opportunities.
Yeah.
This
Alan, sorry, Alan. And just to be clear, I just one sort of point of clarity is that, you know, the document, passive recreation was what was in the heart of the document throughout. It was just inconsistently referenced in some of the areas where they're alluding to other forms of recreation of all sorts and sizes. And that's, you know, it's one thing, you know, in the heart of the document in the beginning to outline specifically reference an exclusive focus to passive recreation was sort of the crux. And then throughout different portions of the document, they just didn't utilize that passive recreation consistently. And it made some sort of things sort of unclear and made inferences, you know, to even like sporting recreation, which isn't really consistent with the trails other than bringing you to those parks where those facilities may exist to have that done. So that was, just to be clear, that was sort of the incorporation or what was being done around passive. It was always in the document. It was just inconsistently referenced or referred to. So just wanted to clear that up.
And I think in this one, we added the collaboration because we were talking about some of the work that's been done with the cyclists and the mountain bikes and that sort of thing, where we've allowed some of that on the trails. The safety, we wanted to include something with respect to the fact that they're wilderness trails and, you know, there could be hazards due to weather. So we added that. The same as the well-managed, just to make sure that, you know, they're aware that occasionally there are closures based on weather conditions. And if there's a situation where, you know, we have to maintain the structure of the trails. Go down, Cindy. I think we kind of skip over. Again, like I'm sure this is a fairly large document. And I know you just got it on Friday. So if there's something that comes out of this as we're chatting that, you know, you want to send in after, by all means, it's probably still going to take a little bit of tweaking. And if there's something in there that you think is important for us to reference or include or make modifications to, we can always have that conversation. Again, the next couple of pages, there's just a couple of spots where we've added the word passive recreation opportunities. If you go to number, yeah, let's leave that one there. So that was, I think we had this discussion, Matthew, during our committee meeting and just how we wanted to word that. And this might have been kind of speaking to the Trails Committee and what we do.
Yeah, jurisdictional, like, and that's really what it comes down to, right? Is that, you know, it's not, Millbrook Valley Trails is not the Trails Master Plan Committee, right? And that's where we're trying to draw that distinction a bit more clearly. And I still think there's some elements to do that. But again, because it's a municipal document, it's not our place to sort of dictate or make drastic, you know, changes as a committee to that document. We're just making some more consistent, really most of the language adjustments and changes have been to be consistent as the document throughout and really sort of focus on the trails themselves rather than these allusions to other recreation. So
I think when we talked about this one initially, we were chatting about that and what the Millbrook Valley Trails Committee's, you know, terms of reference kind of were expected to do with this trail master plan. And I think when we got to the priorities, we put a little more wording in there. So maybe we're okay with this as it stands right now. And then as long as we reference it later on. and capture what the Trails Committee is doing.
For sure.
Okay, if you just scroll down, I don't know if there's anything else in blue. I'm trying to work off the one that I scribbled up, so.
I don't think we have anything till down to 7 now, Alana. So I think
Okay.
it's 2 or 3 pages.
So at the top of
Yeah.
6, I was just gonna,
Okay.
sorry, if we go down. Yeah, the top of 6, there was a reference there. The second sentence in that paragraph actually said that, these activities may include motorized and non-motorized. So we just sort of took out that reference to, the motorized vehicles, because I don't think, there's no snowmobiling. That's not something that, that we're looking at implementing. So we took out those references there. And
Well,
then,
also on that, there's no inventory that is under the jurisdiction of the township that would warrant that language, right? Like if there is a group that becomes established and creates that inventory, I think that this language allows for that to then, allows for and again, what I'm alluding to is that there could be expansions for, different user groups to come under the purview of a trails master plan that just don't exist at the moment. So there's no need to include usage that are permitted on our inventory, but still allow for some open language that should the inventory change or evolve, that it could be incorporated. And that's all that's done here. So I worry about this will probably be the most hotly contested portion of the document, but it's not, just because the verbiage has changed doesn't mean the verbiage isn't more accurate. And doesn't mean it's not open to evolution, which is all we really were worried about.
okay, so I think if we go down to the next page, number 7, this is where we sort of get into the priorities. So we talked about some of them, which I've highlighted in yellow. I think those are all relevant to what we've discussed in the last few meetings. And then I've highlighted the things in blue that are there, and it's a matter of, are these things that are still reasonable? Are there some of them that we want to leave on? Are there other things that we want to include in this specific priority list?
One of the things, Alana, when I was going over this, sorry, I don't see anyone's other hand there, Rob. So I only got Meredith and Maureen and Alana in front of me right now. So sorry for jumping in. In that sentence above, this is one of the areas that I think is important that we sort of clear up. And I just worry, as it stands right now, the way that, is primarily the responsibility of the Millbrook Valley Trails Committee. I don't disagree that that's not, that is accurate, but I would prefer something to the effect of, the only committee of council that has, jurisdiction over a portion of this trails, master plan is the Millbrook Valley Trails Committee. Something to that language to me is more accurate and more open to, if the idea is that in the original intention, I think of however it was when the document was originally created, is that council would sort of lay out these sorts of projects, or the group that was a part of making the master plan would identify these projects for the 10 years. And then, maybe multiple committees might contribute to taking on those different entities and then moving them forward. Clearly, based on the list as it existed in the document 10 years ago, that's really hasn't been how it's been working. It's, the volunteers in Millbrook Valley Trails are carrying the burden and creating linkages and pursuing all of these things. But some of these things are not reasonable at all in the next 10 years from the fiscal constraints. So what I'm going to continue to work on with Alana and Yvette's help is sort of, it would be, if in the future, Millbrook Valley Trails can have, well, I think, and Rob mentioned this, and Rob and I talked about this when we were all meeting as well, is that I think it might be a worthwhile endeavor for Millbrook Valley Trails to present to council in the first, quarter or so, when it's a new iteration of council and a newly formed Millbrook Valley Trails Committee, to present to council their short-term goals for that term of council, for the 4-year sort of horizon. Because then council, it doesn't have to exist and get buried in a document, every 4 years, but that council is aware and has a up-to-date reference to what projects are on the horizon that they'll be funding with their allotment from the budget monies. So there's just a bit more transparency with that. Obviously, I can fill those gaps in as long as I'm the representative to council in my oral reports, but I think it's just a good practice to sort of set your 4-year horizon and objectives and work towards them, and then evaluate and, you know, reassess, and then start anew when you get a new iteration of the committee. So I don't think there's any real objection to that in that conversation, but it's something, you know, definitely something we want to feedback from the committee on.
So I don't know if this is something that we want to discuss now as far as priorities. Is it something that we want to think about and bring back?
Could I just, I'm feeling a sense of urgency with regards getting something more extensively accessible into our plan before the opportunity is gone. So the main problem with I'm speaking here from my history as a physician, and prior to that as an occupational therapist. So I'm very, very familiar with what's necessary to make real accessibility possible. And the easiest way to make something accessible is to have good parking for mobility challenged people at both ends, and flat terrain in between. And around here, there's very little of that. The only place where there is between the gazebo at Station Trail and Fallis Line. And that land is not owned by us. That rail bed is not owned by us. But if we don't move carefully and quickly to try to preserve that flat rail bed, that possibility, other than paved roadways, is going to be lost as an accessible trail possibility. I'm feeling that we don't want to wait very long in terms of discussing that with local landowners, developers, and otherwise. Otherwise, it will be lost.
Is that something that we've looked at the ownership before on those properties, or no? I know we did the ownership stuff around the Mansion Loop, but do you know, Maureen?
I don't. I know that when we were doing the surveying for Station Trail as it exists now, we did see the layout of the different chunks of land that were owned by developers. I think far north, it's the adjacent farm property owners that own the land just as it enters onto Fallis Line. But I think we should really begin to look at preserving that rail bed. So I think we'd have to get an up-to-date look at that.
I think, Maureen, from an accessibility standpoint, because of the costs involved, to me, the most immediate opportunity for that addition to the complement of trails would be for the Miller Valley Trails to make some sort of comment or maybe request or item for consideration to the developer at the with regards to the trail that's already in the loose staging or loose planning for the Tower Hill North subdivision. If they're going to be providing, that is something that I'm sure there are a myriad of different requirements and widths and surfaces that would determine what qualifies as an accessible trail network. And I'm sure depending on capabilities that there can be, I'm not sure if there even would be such a thing that would exist as a fully accessible trail network because of the amount of variability with people's abilities. I don't know that, but it's certainly something that, especially if a developer is going to be footing the cost of the construction of said trail, you know, why not allow them to incur the additional costs of creating that to beat those accessible standards that our $6,300 a year is not going to allow us to create. That was sort of my initial thoughts on that from an accessibility standpoint, knowing the cost that would be associated with creating and meeting those standards. You know, I think it's important that the wilderness trails are going to be the wilderness trails, and we want to maintain that. And I think there's very limited opportunity for wilderness trail inventories to meet any level of accessibility because of the nature and also because of the exposure the municipality would there be in to uphold. So that's just my sort of take on it. From an accessibility standpoint, it's been something that's been a part of the document forever. But again, that's another distinction with Millbrook Valley Trails being the ambassadors of a township document. And obviously the accessibility standards and requirements of a township are far different than a committee of council, especially one that oversees wilderness trails. So again, it's one of those, well, is it our responsibility? No, I would argue it probably isn't. But is it something that we could and should be always opportunistically looking to, bringing into the fold and augmenting our inventory with? Why not? You know, and especially when it's going to be feasible given the fiscal constraints, right? That's sort of that's sort of my overview of the issue.
If I could just ask a question, Maureen, is the issue that it's the priority of the Victoria Rail Trail is in the long term rather than short term? I'm just trying to understand the issue.
Yeah, my concern is what makes that flat rail bed so valuable as an accessible trail is the fact that it is a flat rail bed. So my concern is that if we don't impress developers and local landowners with how important that is, both as a natural and cultural heritage site, but also as a already built asset that needs very little modification to make it an accessible trail that runs, a long way between two concession lines that would be well used, that would link developments, and provides, just lovely scenic route to get from one line to the other, very near the community center. I think if we don't move early in the imagination of the developers, we're going to lose it.
Right. So I guess I'm kind of indirectly agreeing with you. It's just that I see the Victoria Rail Trail still, it's in that priorities table. And, a portion thereof would be that segment that you're referring to. So I see it still in there. I think 5 to 10 years would be maybe that's probably realistic. I don't even know if that's sufficient to really extend out the Victoria Rail Trail as I see it described here. But I would agree with you that in the short term, that one portion of the Victoria Rail Trail will be a priority. But I also think that you're kind of speaking to a secondary piece of guidance in the plan that speaks to accessibility. And I would kind of agree too with Matt. Like, I think you want to find I think it'd be useful to have some guidance in there for what an accessible trail means in Millbrook. Because I know just from experience, I've seen some other governments, not at the municipal level, but provincial level, fund projects where significant portions of trails that were in natural areas have been paved over for the spirit of accessibility. And my experience on those trails is I don't know how well used they are for the purpose that maybe they were designed. We're talking large networks of trails that have been paved over with asphalt through relatively wild areas. So I think it's important if I'm just putting out there for the committee to consider that, both in terms of the fiscal issues that are involved in making trails accessible, but also just our own preference for how we might want to see our trails develop for accessibility in the future. If paving trails is something that we wouldn't want to necessarily see on our network, and I'm not suggesting one over the other, but I'm just agreeing with you that guidance is useful for both accessibility, but also fiscal constraint too. So I'm sorry, that kind of complicates things. I'm kind of speaking specifically to your mention of that Victoria Rail Trail and that one portion between Station Park and Fallis, but also just in terms of general guidance.
Right. When we did the Canada, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we want to just finish with the general trails document. But when we did the Canada 150 grant embellishment to our trails, I think we were told that the type of surfacing that we have on the northern portion of Station Trail as it approaches Tupper is adequate. It doesn't have to be, certainly doesn't have to be paved. And the portion of the M&R Trail that goes from the parking lot to the fishing platform, the viewing stand with the ramp, again, is not paved, and that suffices. So I don't think we need, to pave. My concern is that if we don't work now to preserve that platform, the platform of the rail bed itself, that it might be lost in some way to development.
Right, but what's the question? Are we asking now if it needs to be included at this point?
No, I'm just wondering if the actual laying the groundwork of finding out who owns all that land and what we would need to do to preserve that land that the rail bed is now part of, it certainly shouldn't be pushed out to 5 years because we have development pressure imminent.
Okay. No, I understand that, but so maybe you and I could take that offline then. But if we're saying we don't need to necessarily include it in this document right now,
Right.
then we can sort of think about how it needs to be included in our future plans.
Okay.
But my question is just simply, is it not already in the plan? Are we not looking at it there? Site 6, is that not, that is that route, is it not? Yeah.
Well, again, it again becomes like, this is one, I'm not saying we need to make all of these changes to this portion of the document as it exists now, but it is important. I thought there might be an opportunity to, especially in some of the outdated projects, to simply say, that's not happening anymore, or that's not happening anytime soon. Like the Cavan Swamp Loop, for example, like 3 to 5 years ago, there's no North Cavan Trail Committee to carry that on, but it was outlined and identified to be existing in a township document. So, but what I think there is a value in doing for Millbrook Valley Trails is to figure out what your own, short-term objectives are. And you can have longer ones as well. You know what I mean? Like you can have ongoing, and accessibility isn't one of those ongoing things. I don't expect it to be done in 2 years necessarily. If the developer says no, well, that's still not something that we're going to have money to create, or to the same extent that the developer would, but it's an ongoing responsibility. But what the purpose of the conversation was to give us a real granular thought. Okay, well, we've got about 1.5 years left or 2 years left in this current iteration of council. Let's talk about what those 2 years are going to be and what could theoretically be done. And then from there, start thinking ahead to what the next 4 years would be like, and just identify those and highlight them so that you can actually work towards those things and sort of monitor your progress, and also be transparent with council. So it's not that we need to change or evaluate all of these different iterations here, but it's important to have that framework as a committee ironed down, specifically with regards to the utilization of those donated funds, which is something, as everyone's aware, council has been asking about. And that's important that we identify that project, because as we know, there's opportunities for more of that funding to potentially be available if we use it. So not only is it, has there been direction at council that it's important that, or some interest from council that it's important that we start to think about that money. There's been also some other groups that have said, well, stop funding Millbrook Valley Trails with that amount of money, because they have all kinds, having received this sort of donation. So there's a myriad of reasons why this is a benefit for us to do, both operationally, functionally, and also, just as a best sort of practice to cross things off the list that you're actually going to do and narrow our focus into what's a feasible objective in these 2 and 6 year horizons, and then go from there. It doesn't mean you're bound to specifically only those things. It just makes things a lot more simplistic, and provides council at least with a little bit more clear understanding as to what's going on project wise. And I think will be a benefit to the committee as well moving forward. Just like we're going to, the intention in this sort of document outline was that this portion would be updated. And, I think there are elements of this that can remain that have nothing to do with Millbrook Valley Trails. But we should clarify what are Millbrook Valley Trails, immediate and shorter and maybe midterm projects that they're intending to move forward with, and then move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I would prefer that 6 be divided into 2 sections, that the section from King Street to Fallis Line be considered in the medium term, like 3 to 5 years, and then the portion that extends north to Grenoble Line in 5 to 10 years, perhaps.
And perhaps Matt, maybe I'm misinterpreting the color coding here, the yellow and versus the blue. Is there any, what does the yellow and blue highlighting indicate?
The yellow was just things
I'll
that
let the highlighter speak to this.
the yellow are things that we've been talking about, I think, in the last few meetings. The blue is stuff that was already on there that was just sort of up for discussion. Is this something that we're still looking at? Is this something we want to keep on here for the long term? Is there other things that we're doing now that we should add as far as the yellow goes? So this part was probably more up for discussion than most of the other minor amendments that were made.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And if it also has to do with the feasibility, right? Like, we don't want to over promise these things that we're going to do. Like, the budget's not going to change for the foreseeable future, especially with the donated monies, right? And the fiscal constraints that the municipality is going to be under realistically with COVID, right? So, is it, like, to me, the Trans-Canada Trail to Peterborough, like, we would need to set aside our entire amount of funding and the amount of time as a committee of volunteers to consult with all the landowners, et cetera, to accomplish that. It's just not reasonable. So, if that can exist in the township's document, but from a Millbrook Valley Trail standpoint, I don't think we shouldn't be trying to expand or extend our jurisdiction. I think we should stay within our lane to do the things that we want to do and be clear about them. And, not keep on things that we're not going to be doing, whether the township initially wanted them or not. I mean, it's been 10 years and there's been not a change in any of the language. So it's just not the township doesn't have capacity or time to, we're not having, we're rehiring temporary rec people because of the closures of the community center. Like, we don't have bandwidth to have a trails person, we haven't replaced Jerry. Like we don't have this bench strength or funding available to have these people spending millions of dollars developing trails or on staffers to be doing that. It's just not realistic. So I'm just saying, like, figure out our purview, figure out our mandate, but also keep in mind the limitations of our capabilities, because if we're seen as extending them beyond, a lot of times I've seen this in my limited experience is that people want to overreach into things that are beyond their jurisdiction. Well, then you're held to the standard of fulfilling the entirety of the document and subject to all of the criticisms for not fulfilling all of it. But you said you wanted it, but you're not going to do it all. Well, it becomes a bit of a more contentious issue. And I think one of my objectives is to try to make it a bit cleaner and clearer so that Millbrook Valley Trails can continue to do all the good work that it's doing and not be held to an unrealistic expectation because the document is, 10 years old and created for something that sounds like it's expected our capacity to be far in excess of what it actually is, if that makes sense.
It does, but let me also add, Matt, that this reiterate that this is a living document, right?
100%.
The priorities change, we can certainly add to this. We're not going to be locked into this.
No, 100%. And that's the lion's share of those changes has been made to make that more true throughout the document as well. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything I've heard. I do agree with Maureen, though, that maybe at some point, I don't know if it's more of a work plan, like a fiscal work plan, but taking a look at some of these routes and maybe segmenting them down into short, medium, long term instead of having, because I think we all know that some of these routes are extensive. Like Matt, I think the one that you highlighted is a great example of something that maybe it's not even a long term, maybe it's an unrealistic route Millbrook to Peterborough, right? But if we can look at what are the short term segments that maybe those are more realistic accomplishments in the near term, that maybe that's like a work planning process to go through that exercise.
Okay, so where do we go from here then? Do we want to go away and think about what these priorities are prior to updating the document, or is the township preference that we solidify it now?
I'd appreciate having a second look.
Yeah, I think I was hopeful we could sort of, I just don't, maybe we didn't have enough time, but maybe for the next meeting at the latest, we can sort of think of the Millbrook Valley Trails iteration of this portion of this document so that, and I can, if Alana, we had talked about potentially getting it on for March 1st, but I don't believe, or was it maybe the second meeting in March? I can't remember. But that was the intention. That said, to Robert's point, it is a living document, and the majority of our changes, we can make an allusion to the fact that Millbrook Valley Trails is going to come back to council, and I can provide it, I think, in an oral report. I don't think we would need to do a delegation to say, by the way, based on this document, we've created our own, short-term forecast for what the projects are and what our priorities are. And here it is for council's, review. And, because we felt that that portion of the document was, rather than needing to be revisited by council, we can provide you with the actual update of what's going on. And if council has any issues, then I can carry those back and present them to the committee. Alana, is anything I said inaccurate?
No, I just think, if the committee needs more time and they want to review it, we can bring it back at the next meeting. There's no rush to have it in front of council.
Yeah.
It needs probably just some finessing anyway before it goes back to council. So we can do some of that in the meantime too, just trying to fix the document from a PDF to a Word and that sort of thing. There might be areas in there that need to be cleaned up. So we can bring it back for the next meeting. And if you guys have a chance to take a look in the meantime, and then you can come up with your priorities, we can fill it in and it'll be ready to go.
Sounds good.
And it might be a good time. You'll have Yvette here too, so she can, probably provide some additional insight on what's reasonable. And I know she was here when this was originally created, but you're right. You look at things like the Cabin Swamp Loop. This document was done in 2010, and that said 3 to 5 years. So those kinds of items are probably outdated and isn't something that you want to push forward.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in the original meeting last week, like I want to see the mansion loop on here, and all those sort of connections that we've talked about. So that's if we can give it a thought, and I assume this will go out as part of the minutes, so the members that aren't here can also review and think about it for the next meeting as well.
Yeah, I can put it in the minutes, and we're essentially not going to make any changes here from what was sent out before. So just to put a note to review it for the next one. The other thing you might want to do when this does go to council, when you look at things like the mansion loop, it wasn't in the original trail master plan. So you probably want to highlight it just to ensure, because I think we talked about before we even were going to get started on the mansion loop, going back to council and making sure that you have their endorsement. So this might be a good opportunity too, to have that outlined in the report that goes to council to say, hey, we want to do this, this, and this. We've identified it in these amendments, and get their support that way. So you're covering your bases.
Right. Okay. So then further to this section, Alana, is there anything else we need to cover in the rest of the document?
No, I've gone through it pretty extensively, so I had some more comments. I don't think we have time to get into some of it right now. And I'm very interested in that mansion loop. I know that there's, depending on how that gets configured, I think there's still some constraints in that area of the valley. There's still some private parcels. I know over the last number of decades, some of those parcels are now public lands, but I believe there's still maybe some private parcels in there. So the configuration of that,
yeah, we've already.
I don't think we can go into the details here.
No, we've already identified that for sure. Okay, but Alana, is there anything else we need to cover in this document?
The only other thing that we have was some of the, I just, before the meeting, I asked Alana to follow up on this with regards to the recommendations listed at the back of the document. As I've mentioned in previous discussions, that there's been some residents with issues made about, public consultation requirements and due process and all of that extent. So we cleaned up the language in that recommendation, but we're also just going to verify exactly how the document was originally received by council, because it's unique that there would be this many recommendations in a document, but it could be a semantic language thing that when the master plan was adopted, if all of the recommendations were adopted, it has different implications than just accepting or receiving a document as it presented. So we're going to validate that, but as it stands right now, there isn't a formal policy or requirement for public consult. But what we've changed it to is that best efforts would be made. And I know that we have done those sorts of engagements specifically with new trail construction in the past. But it probably makes sense for Millbrook Valley Trails to, just to go over what we do have as a committee of council with regards to our best practices and ensure that language is tight. And we'll do the same from a township perspective here to make sure that it's clear. But right now, as it's only a recommendation in a document, it's not a policy. So there's no entitlement to a recommendation in a policy. But if all of the recommendations were accepted by council, we have to do a little bit of sleuthing to see exactly how that would work too. So
okay,
I will report back on that, I guess, is the only thing I can say to that.
Okay. So then we don't need to go through any other highlighter, or you want to cover that while we've got it up in front of everybody, Alana?
I think most of the stuff between the priorities and this page is really just identifying all those priorities. So, we've highlighted some of it, but maybe if you start with the priorities and then you can go through these once you've established what they are, take out the ones that are irrelevant and include any additional information in this area. So I don't think there's much in these pages that we can really deal with until you establish those priorities.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll ask everybody then to think about what those priorities should be for the next meeting, and read the document as it comes out in the minutes. Any other discussion around that? No? Okay, any other items of business that we need to cover tonight?
Rob? Sorry, I don't know if you can see me. So I don't know, I believe most people are aware, but Alana has accepted another position and will no longer be presented here. Cindy's going to take over some of the minute portions and be with us for the next few meetings to sort of gap fill. And I think Yvette might be joining us here there. But, you know, obviously, Alana has been a huge asset to the township. And I know she's been a big asset to the Millbrook Valley Trails and stepping in for Jerry's big shoes. So we're very sorry as a municipality to see her go. But we, you know, she's earned the opportunity that she's moving into, and I know she's going to do great there. But I know that Rob is working on something on behalf of the committee, but I just wanted to give, in case everyone wasn't aware, just make them all aware that this is her last meeting with us, and just publicly thank her for her contributions here. But, you know, obviously that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the benefit that she's been to the municipality. So we are, you know, very sorry to be missing her, but very happy that she's got the opportunity she very much deserves, and very much appreciate Cindy stepping in while we sort of work towards the new staffing structures that we're going to have to overcome. But just wanted to give everyone on the committee the chance to say goodbye and say thank you to Alana for all her hard work, and obviously wish her all the best in the next iteration of her career.
Congratulations, Alana.
Thank you.
So really happy for you. They're so lucky up in Dummer to get you.
Thank you. I promise I'm leaving you in good hands.
Thanks for everything, Alana. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, congratulations, Alana. It's
Thank
great.
you very much.
Yes, let me just say on behalf of all members present and those who aren't with us tonight, thank you very much for all of your efforts. It's been very greatly appreciated. You have been an incredible asset to us, and as Matt said, you will be sorely missed. Congratulations on your new position. Well deserved.
Thank you. It's a little sad to be leaving, but I am excited for the new opportunity and looking forward to a new adventure. So
Great.
Yes, congratulations. We'll miss you.
thank you.
And you saw Cindy made a cameo there. For those of you who don't know Cindy Page, she'll be with us, supporting us for the next few meetings. So thanks, Cindy. So you can introduce yourself. And like I said, I think Yvette might pop in for a couple of different meetings as well. But you know, just in case you're looking for anyone, Alana's with us till I think the 10th, is it March? So, and then Cindy will probably be. I think we'll keep the emails the same, but I'll have an update for the committee about how things are going to work. But if you haven't, meet Cindy. Cindy's great, and she's very capable to help us out. And we appreciate that work too, Cindy. So thanks very much for being here tonight.
No problem. Anything I can do to help, just flip me an email.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Cindy.
Okay, with that being said, can I have a motion for adjournment? Oh, actually, maybe just before we go, Alana, my last request, can you remind us who is doing the trails report next month?
Right in front of me, no, but I will send it out. I'll send out that document, the trail master plan, again to everybody for those that aren't here. I can't connect to the server while I'm at home in a Zoom meeting, so I don't know exactly who's coming up, but I will put that out in the email so that whoever it is fully aware before next.
Thank you. It's on my phone, but my phone has died. So, all right, I appreciate that. Okay, motion for adjournment.
I'll move to adjourn.
Marie, seconded by Matthew. All in favor? Wonderful. All right. Thanks very much, folks. Appreciate it, and stay safe. We'll see you next month.